It has been 3 years since the release of the AirPods Pro 2nd generation, and in that time frame, it has established itself as the premier choice for anyone looking for a true wireless bud. And even in my case, it's true as well. If anyone asks me for a recommendation for a true wireless buds, usually I would go either the Galaxy Buds 2 Pro, which is kind of outdated at this point, or the tried and true Apple AirPods 2. 3 years later, we are now here with the Apple AirPods Pro 3rd generation. And as with every other major release, all of you have asked me, demanded that I review it despite the fact that I have retired for more than a year now. At this point, I have absolutely nothing to lose. So today, let's talk about the Apple AirPods Pro 3 from the perspective of someone who actually cares about audio. So let's get into it. First of all, for videos like this, I feel like I have to do a bit of a self-introduction. So hello, my name is Crinacle. I used to be a reviewer as well as a few other things, but I think now most people would know me for 3 big things. I run and maintain the world's largest public database of headphone and earphone measurements on 3 standards, 711, GRAS 43AG-7, as well as the new Brew & Care Type 5128. I now have my own audio retail store, Hangout.audio, where we ship globally and we sell many different IEMs of different budgets as well as performances. On top of that, I also have my own audio brand, Crinacle. So on top of my perspective as an ex-reviewer, you can also consider the fact that I am a manufacturer as well as an acoustic tuner. So you have seen the title of this video, so let me not waste too much time and let's get right into the reason why you're even here in the first place. The sound. The Apple AirPods Pro 3 is definitely different from the previous generation. I think we all expect that at this point. So how is it different? Well, the AirPods Pro 3 is more of a V-shaped sound signature. That is to say, there is more low frequency and high frequency, more bass and more treble, but it also tilts a little bit more towards the treble side. When I first opened up my AirPods Pro, which I bought in California right after CanJam, my initial impressions were not the greatest. I think the first thing that hit me was the amount of high frequency that the new AirPods Pro has. It is a lot, some would call it airy, but to me it just delivered too much sharpness and a little bit too much brightness for me to personally enjoy. And this is a theme that I see recurring a lot with regular people as well. A lot of people with no experience in terms of graphs or technical listening would always tell me that, oh, the new AirPods Pro feels a bit like shimmery or airy or bright or all other, those kind of descriptors that you see kind of trending into that one direction. So compared to the old AirPods, the AirPods Pro 2, yes, you can see that there is quite a bit extra elevation in the treble, but all of that is also exacerbated by the fact that it also has a bit less lower mids. The whole sound signature of the AirPods Pro 3 tilts upwards relative to the older generation. It's not a change that I personally like. It feels like giving one thing but taking 3 things away. Now let's talk about the thing that I really like about the 3rd generation, and that is the bass response, the shape of the bass response. It is a lot of bass, but they do it in a way that is very well controlled and it doesn't bleed into the lower mids. It's very separated from the rest of the melody. This bass response is actually very reminiscent of my own preference curve, the IEF Preference 2025, and for all the same reasons, it allows for a lot of that extra emphasis while giving a lot of control as well as separation from everything else. So contrary to a lot of opinions that I've been seeing on the internet, no, actually I really like the bass on the Apple AirPods 3. But this shape of bass kind of only works if your treble isn't overcooked, so to say. So as with many things, sound is a balance of all its parts. And while I really like the bass on the AirPods Pro 3, I don't think it's actually appropriate for its sound signature. Given the amount of treble that the AirPods Pro 3 has, this kind of extremely low shelving actually doesn't do it much favors. Instead, it sounds a little bit too thin, and as I've mentioned before, it's a V shape that leans a little bit too much into the high frequencies. Instead of going for this extremely low shelving, I feel like they they could have added a little bit more mid-bass, maybe the shelving being around 100 Hz rather than 80, and this would give a little bit of relative meat on the bones, kind of cut through that treble a little bit, and overall I think sounds a little bit better. So relative to the AirPods Pro 2, the AirPods Pro 3, yes, is more V-shaped, less balanced, if you want to call it that. And for that reason, I personally prefer the AirPods Pro 2. I need to remind a lot of people that sound is very subjective. What I like might not be what you like, and it's very hard for me to say that something is objectively better. But there is another reason why I like the AirPods Pro 2 better, and that is with the equal loudness compensation that the AirPods Pro 3 has, especially on Apple devices and, well, not on Windows devices for weird reasons that I'll go into later. Hello, Crin from the future here. So, I lied. I still don't know why equal loudness compensation doesn't activate on Windows on the AirPods Pro 3s. They activate on the AirPods Pro 2s, so this doesn't seem to be an OS issue. I'm still kind of scratching my head on this. Hopefully I have a solution in the future, but for now, back to the video. So what is equal loudness compensation? Well, we probably have heard about it floating around as the Fletcher-Munson curve, which is actually an outdated version of equal loudness. What equal loudness is the theory that if you listen to louder and louder volumes, your perception of bass and treble also increases as well. And that's also one of the reasons why a lot of people like listening to loud volumes, and that is your bass and treble just sounds so much higher relative to lower listening volumes and sounds much more fun, more engaging, more thumpy, yada yada yada. So Apple, as well as a few other audio brands, have implemented equal loudness compensation into their true wireless buds. And what that means is that at lower listening volumes, you get more bass as well as more treble. This is fine, sometimes even preferable in a product like the Apple AirPods Pro 2. It starts out with a balanced-ish signature, and then as you go low in volumes, like I am, you get more bass as well as more treble, but it doesn't sound like it's being overcooked or overdone in any way. The problem with the AirPods Pro 3, on the other hand, is that it already starts with a V-shaped signature right at the maximum volume. This is not something that I am used to. So the moment you go down into the listening levels that I myself am personally listening to, you get a lot. Too much, actually. So I'm in a weird position now where I actually like the AirPods Pro 3 somewhat without the equal loudness compensation, but the moment I go to a device that has the equal loudness compensation, I do not like it. AirPods Pro 2, on the other hand, on high volumes, it sounds relatively balanced, and on lower listening volumes, still sounds flavored enough, but not to the point of it ruining the entire mix. So my opinion on the AirPods Pro 3 is fairly simple. I think that it sounds worse than the AirPods Pro 2, but I don't think it sounds bad. Because by all means, I think that this is still kind of a miracle of technology. Everything outside of the AirPods Pro 3 is amazing. But it's just that the sound, yes, I wish that they maybe either stuck to the old tuning or refined it in a way that doesn't try and push up the treble in the way that they've done right now. And now that I've talked about sound quality, it segues nicely into our next section, which is the non-audio stuff. What actually makes the AirPods Pro 3 unequivocally the best true wireless buds in the market today? First, let's talk about the obvious, the build. If you have handled an AirPods any generation or even a non-pro stuff, you probably know exactly what I'm talking about. It's plastic, but it's durable plastic and still feels extremely premium. I have no complaints. The size and fit of the buds themselves have changed from the AirPods Pro 2, where the AirPods Pro 2 was a lot more snug up against the bowl of my concha area. The AirPods Pro 3, on the other hand, is a little bit longer. It's kind of hard to explain. It juts out slightly and doesn't fit quite as snugly inside the bowl. So purely in terms of fit and comfort, I think the old AirPods Pro 2 takes the cake. In terms of the functionality, unlike the AirPods Pro 2, which had a button on the back that you press whenever you want to pair with a newer device, the AirPods Pro 3, on the other hand, has a touch-sensitive front. So you double tap the front of the case and you go into pairing mode. Changing between ANC and transparency is the same as the old model. You just take the stem, you squeeze it a little bit, and there you go. Now, the isolation of the AirPods Pro 3, and that takes into account both the passive as well as the active noise cancellation, is, yes, as we have all expected, so much better on the new generation. These are data points from both Sound Guys as well as Artings, which both indicate that yes, ANC performance as well as passive noise cancellation are both much improved on the new generation. And while I do hear that big improvement in the passive noise isolation, I feel like the ANC improvements aren't as apparent, at least to my ears. Take it from a guy who has flown 17 hours from LAX to Singapore and have tested both the AirPods Pro 2 and 3. Yes, there is an improvement in ANC, but swapping between the two, I feel like the improvements aren't as big as the data would have suggested, subjectively speaking at least. But where I'll consider the AirPods Pro 2's passive noise cancellation to be kind of terrible, the 3 is still not good, but at least kind of on par with what you get on the market today. Transparency mode is one of the great hallmarks of the Apple AirPods Pro, all the way down to the first generation. Consistently, they have always outdone the market, and it is no different with the third generation. Transparency mode is almost nearly indistinguishable from actual real life. I say almost nearly because clearly there's still some latency issues, there's some difference in frequency response, but generally if you told me that, oh, I'm just wearing a pair of open-air buds, I would have believed you. That said, some people have kind of commented to me that the transparency mode on the AirPods Pro 3 is just a little bit more digital sounding compared to the 2. I kind of get where they're coming from, but at least in terms of the data, it doesn't quite see that. But it's a common enough comment that I think warrants some looking into, especially from Apple. Now, the battery life. And I feel like this is one of those miraculous advances because despite the fact that Apple have improved on the ANC performance, which takes up a lot of battery, they've actually increased the individual battery life of the buds from slightly under 6 hours on the AirPods Pro 2 to over 8 hours on the third generation. That's magic at this point. Now, I think for most people, this would be a stat that would be kind of underrated because most people would be commuting for maybe maximum of 3 hours at one shot. But for someone like me who travels quite a lot, especially on a longer flight, these extra 2 hours are actually quite a godsend, if I'm being honest. And for those of you who like to use the AirPods Pros as sleeping buds, then yes, the extra battery life would also be much appreciated, though let's be honest, after maybe 2 hours, you're dead asleep and wouldn't care anyways. Now, as I've mentioned in my old AirPods Pro 2 review, there is also adaptive EQ on the third generation. And I've seen a fair few people criticize measurements on the internet because of the fact that the AirPods Pro 3 has adaptive EQ. Here's where I need to remind people, some of them tourists, that adaptive EQ makes your measurements more similar, not different. Here are the 5-seat measurements of my AirPods Pro 3, and you can see that it's very similar to the single seat measurements, and that is for the fact that adaptive EQ tries to make your AirPods Pros as similar as possible regardless of how you fit them in your ears. Sometimes this manifests as increasing the bass when you have an imperfect fit, resulting in leakages. In other cases, this would be realigning the treble so it feels more consistent. What the AirPods Pro tries to do is to get its frequency response as consistent as possible on as many ear canals as possible. Which is why, interestingly, for my nerds out there, that you can see the measurements of it on the 5128 kind of matches up to measurements on the 711 as well. No other true wireless buds or IEMs have done this before. Apple engineers again are doing magic. By the way, for those interested, here is a quick microphone comparison between the AirPods Pro 2 and 3s. This is the AirPods Pro 2 in a quiet room. This is the AirPods Pro 3 in a quiet room. This is the AirPods Pro 2 on a busy
This is the AirPods Pro 3 on a busy street.
So now let's talk about the comparisons, and the most obvious would be, yes, the Apple AirPods Pro 2. As I mentioned before, yes, I prefer the tuning on the Apple AirPods Pro 2, but I can also fully admit that literally everything else about the AirPods Pro 3, apart from maybe the fit, is just wholly superior. Now, if Apple were to go the Sony route and provide us with a universal companion app that allowed us to change the tuning of the Apple AirPods Pro, then I think this review would have been so much more positive. Now, the only way that I know that you could somewhat tune the AirPods Pro is that you have to go into the accessibility section of the settings app, go into headphone accommodations, and then kind of fiddle around with that. I don't exactly know what they do. And I'm not willing to test it because clearly Apple does not want you to change the tuning of, well, not just the AirPods Pro, but literally anything under their ecosystem. So yes, you could use a system-wide EQ as well, but as we all know, since you are probably going to be using the AirPods Pro on an iPhone, good luck. Now, the other main competitor to the Apple AirPods Pro 3 would be the Samsung Galaxy Buds 3 Pro. And at this point, I don't want to waste any time, and I would say that it is an absolute massacre. Now, in terms of the tuning, as much as I think that the AirPods Pro 3 is a bit worse to my ears compared to the AirPods Pro 2, it's much better than the Buds 3 Pro, which sounds a little bit muddy, definitely overcooked in the bass, and, well, flavored is the nice way to put it. And that's not even talking about the ANC, the battery life, the connectivity, the features. Apple have pretty much demonstrated how it's like to dominate this year's TWS wars. Now, there are a lot of great features that the AirPods Pro has that are unfortunately locked behind the Apple ecosystem. You have the hearing aid feature, you have the new heartbeat sensor, you have spatial audio, you have personalized spatial audio, you even have the ear health indicator app that allows you to see how loud you're listening to, and all of these features I unfortunately cannot use as an Android and Windows user. So I won't go too deep into all of these new features. There are clearly other tech tubers that have gone through all of these in my place, so watch them instead. But again, at least from the audiophile's perspective, I hope that this review was of use to you, and if not, at least from the perspective of one person on the internet. Now, let me just shout out my big money boys. Here are all of your names if you have subscribed to the $20 tier on my Patreon. And for those of you who have subscribed to the $30 tier, allow me to speak out your beautiful names: Dennis, crinacle, Andrew, Surfing, Chemotherapy, and Daryl. I thank you all. I would like to remind people that, again, I was the biggest fan of the Apple AirPods Pro 2, and it really does pain me to say that I did not like the AirPods Pro 3 as much. But as per usual, see you guys next week, and don't die. Fuck off.